had the great privilege of working my first job out of college with WOLA, Washington Office of Latin America, that Joe founded, and now I'm running a nonprofit, the International Labor Rights Forum, which is a nonprofit that Joe helped birth. He was sort of a midwife in getting ILRF started in the day. And our organization, as well as the Institute for Policy Studies and WOLA, are organizations that have been working to challenge the assumptions of mainstream development policies. And we've been doing it now for 30, 40, 50 years in some cases. The term Washington Consensus got coined in 1989, but it was starting to gel already earlier than that in the 80s. And I think some people know it. We kind of dated ourselves by titling the talk with that, but a lot of us have been saying, wait, the assumptions behind mainstream development policy are wrong, and we feel like we fought that fight 30 years ago, and we've got some reforms underway, but in the talk we had earlier today, a lot of us realized, wait a minute, we didn't defeat it, it's still alive and strong in a lot of countries, and Debra's book has been a motivating factor for some of us to stop and say, wait a minute, how do we continue to challenge the issues, the development consensus, so to speak, which is really also talked about as neoliberal policies. And how do we put mechanisms in place to enable our partners in developing countries to challenge the same things that we're trying to challenge here in Washington? And I think Debra's videos are a great way of doing that, and really, her motivation for writing the book has something to do with how do we start that conversation. So we just had a great conversation among a lot of policy wonks, folks who I hope you guys will be filling our jobs 20 years from now, or maybe you'll be doing it 5 years from now, I don't know. But we're all sort of still grappling with many of these themes, and we came away saying, wait, we need to continue the conversation. So the book is a great collection, I think, for students. I know I want to use some of the chapters in the class that I teach on human rights and development policy. It's a great collection of anecdotes combined with economic analysis of what's gone wrong with development, project-based as well as sort of theoretical assumptions that have gone wrong. And because we just had this great event, we forgot to bring the copies of the book that we left on the table at this other meeting. But it's quite a thick book, although you can peel off different chapters and case studies in this great way and can pull away the myths. But I'll let Debra present the book, and I'll just say, I think it's great that you've come. You're following in line with Joe. No wonder you guys hit it off so well a year ago, because you're both professional agitators. and I think it's good to stir the pot and keep us pushing harder for reforms.
So I just want to do a quick introduction about myself. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, buenas tardes, what are the languages? Anyway, bonjour. I like to consider myself, I did, or if I want to be more polite, namaskar. I like to consider myself a citizen of the world, but I was not always that way. I grew up in New Mexico, which is pretty provincial. I did my Peace Corps I went from being a very, very shy college student studying English literature. I loved reading novels, and I was going to be a novelist, and fortunately it turns out I have absolutely no capacity whatsoever to write novels. So that was actually a fortunate failure in my life, because I think I'm doing something far more valuable and more interesting. So I went off to Peace Corps as a very naive 21-year-old, and I discovered what a lot of Peace Corps volunteers discover. We were sent by the US government to help these poor countries to do something useful, wink wink. And we provide great entertainment to the locals. They laugh at us a lot. We're very entertaining because we have no idea how to live the way they do, and we are incredibly foolish about all sorts of things. So it's actually great for stripping away the unimportant parts of your ego. You learn to be laughed at. It's an enormous educational experience for the volunteer, and we are supposed to live with the people we're helping. I lived in a house with 9 other people. We shared one bathroom, and it was an extremely profound educational experience. I also discovered that I really don't fit in the United States. I know you're shocked to hear that, but I felt so much more comfortable in Guatemala for various reasons, which I might get back to. So I came back, and because I wanted to leave again, or do something more interesting. I got a master's degree in public health, and I was working for PAHO, Pan American Health Organization. I got to license tours around Latin America. I had a lovely time. My job fell through, and I landed up getting a job in Hanoi, Vietnam. Did not want to go there. Had no interest in living in Asia, and have not left since. That's been 22 years now. So I was in a integrated development project. And at the time, I had little understanding of development issues other than there's these poor people in these countries, and me being an American, naturally I have the knowledge to help them work their way out of their poverty. So that's the nice, naive approach I went in with. I spent 4 years in Vietnam, had a fantastic time, learned a lot. Went from there to Bangladesh. I took a 2-year break in Sri Lanka. Somebody here was, yes. Ayvon. I had 2 years in Sri Lanka where I was actually finishing the book, Beyond Apologies, which, by the way, is free online. I will send some copies over. The videos, if people want to watch the videos, the easiest is to go to YouTube and search for Beyond Apologies. You can read it online at issuu.com, ISU, if you search for Beyond Apologies. We have a website. I'll give you my card. The website, unfortunately, is often down, but trying to get this message out. So anyway, I've got 22 years in Asia, and I started out working on health issues. I actually do have a job. Some people question how that's possible, but I actually have a formal job working for a Canadian public health NGO. So I started a bit in the formal, what do you do as a public health person kind of job, and particularly working on tobacco control. And it became increasingly obvious that there's some really major things wrong with the world. Not just the tobacco control part. I then later got into, I did some stuff with sexuality and then urban planning and transport. And then because of everything I was seeing that was wrong and my inability to do anything at the bigger level to fix it, I became interested in economics, because that was obviously, if you'll forgive the expression, the root of all evil. So tobacco control, there's this weird issue where we have a product that we know kills about half of long-term users, and it's bad for the environment, and the workers are often living in terrible poverty and affected by the chemicals. And we have a really active civil society movement, and we know what laws work on reducing tobacco use, and it's really hard to get governments to pass the laws because these sovereign governments are not sovereign. Right? You know what I'm talking about. Sovereign government. I mean, I don't know, who came up with that expression? That we think it means something. I was a bit shocked to discover that, in fact, it's the corporations that are sovereign. And it's our job in civil society to figure out a way to disenable the corporations from making the governments do what they want. But I did not know that when I started out in public health. And to me, tobacco control was a great training ground because we have been very successful. And we learned the power of organizing. I was talking with Judy on the way over. There's an incredibly well-networked tobacco control movement. So activists from around the world, we talk, we share ideas, we share strategies. We tell each other what's happening in our country so we know what the industry is going to do where. You can kind of track them. It's a dinosaur. They're very clumsy. They move slowly. They're not very strategic. And I thought, great. So let's take this information and fight even bigger corporations. Because tobacco, not powerful, but they're not that powerful. So let's take on something even bigger, like the auto industry or the fuel industry or the road building industry. So it's not a difficult fight. What's the fun, right? And I talk to my friends in tobacco control, and they say, basically, somebody said it earlier, she actually hadn't said it, but thank you for the crazy talk is what I heard, and she actually said something completely different from that. But I'm so used to people calling me crazy because I have these ambitions. And I believe in democracy in the sense of the public having a say in policies. And if we're going to keep quiet and just allow corporations to run our governments, of course this doesn't happen in the US, here we're free from all that, right? I was actually talking recently in India, I think, or Bangladesh. I said, do you know how we solved the problem of corruption in the United States? We legalized it.
Yeah.
Okay, we won't go into that. I never insult. I still hang on to my U.S. passport. It's very handy. I know one of these days they're going to take it away from me, but I'm trying to hold on to it. It allows me to do all this great travel. Yeah, so I started noticing these problems across different issues and different countries, and I talk to my colleagues, and I try to convince them, well, now we know what to do, right? So we can actually have genuine democracy, which is citizens making decisions how they want to live. And if, for instance, we see that the economic policies, what outdated, Judy, you've been working for 50 years. I think you were in when you started. You said we've been doing this for 50 years. I was
30, I was referring to Joe's
okay.
organization.
You were very small when you started. So we've been working on these issues, and we think that we've made headway. And unfortunately, when I go around, I go to different countries and I open the newspaper and everything is still, oh, GDP isn't going up as fast as we want, disaster. Oh, we need more foreign direct investment. Oh, if we can just get those new factories in, then boy, poverty will magically disappear. Now, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, we had an excuse. I don't know my history that much. A while ago, we had an excuse to be naive and to believe that economic growth of GDP was going to end poverty. But after a while, you stay on the same track. In country after country after country, you do the privatizations and you open up your trade and you deregulate the issues of currency going in and out, and you get the same results. And inequality continues to grow, and you get bankrupt governments and billionaires, and you start thinking, maybe there's a little flaw in these theories, except it's not actually a flaw. It's worse than that, because someone is benefiting. Those billionaires and these corporations. So when you get inequality, the people on the bottom might not be very happy, but of course they're struggling to survive, so there's not a lot they're going to do about it. The middle class is looking up and hoping they're going to get there one day. And I lived in Vietnam. I moved there just after the U.S. lifted its trade embargo, and there was this sudden onrush of these products and restaurants and these fancy shops, and it was kind of exciting. And inequality got worse, and the poor were worse off, and the middle class was just having a good time. So you've got people who really benefit, a lot of people who benefit slightly or hope to benefit, but at the same time, they're actually worse off because they lose some other things, like some of their security in healthcare or education, economic security, some free time, and the environment getting completely devastated. So a lot of these countries, I used to ride a bicycle in Hanoi. Now it's too dangerous and the air stinks. If I walk for 2 hours, I feel like I'm going to throw up. There's so much pollution in the air. Well, that's not really benefiting anyone. So let's keep on the same path. Now,
I feel like I should put sarcasm buzzers next to you every time you do one of those.
Yeah, I have a little trouble. Seemed kind of obvious to me, if you keep on the same path and things get worse and worse. Actually, it's fascinating. I was rereading Swift, Gulliver's Travels. This book is wasted on children. It was incredible. I mean, it's a fun book for kids. You get the excerpted version, which takes all the parody out, right? You just mentioned sarcasm. And he talks about, I was amazed, because at the same time I'm reading David Suzuki talking about industrial agriculture, and these books are, at that point, in parallel. So Swift is talking about this place where the experts come in and say, oh, you people don't understand agriculture, so let's change all the methods, and then the soil becomes infertile and the crops all die, and they say, see, you need to do more of this. And I thought, this is incredible. That was, what, 1700s? Who knew this stuff started that long ago? And the same line, oh, you're just not doing enough of it. Now, I'm here talking to you guys. Oh, two reasons. One is because you're young, a lot of you, most of you are young. a lot younger than I am. And winning these battles, and they're winnable, is going to take a lot of energy and hard work and creativity and spirit of fun. Laughter makes you more creative. So I need young people. And the other reason is I was giving a talk about my book in India, and one of the questions was, do you only tell this to people in India and Bangladesh, or do you also say these things to Americans? I loved that question. I wanted to run over and hug her. Because some people, I think, believe, and we get this problem, I, as an American, go to low-income countries and say, you don't want to follow the American path. Stick to your low-consumption model. You don't need all this development. And they say, well, you got to enjoy it, and then say, I'm tired of it. And we want to go down the same path. And that is so tragic, because you destroy your environment, you destroy your social systems, you destroy your democracy, and then you say, we kind of got a disaster on our hands, now let's undo it. Which is crazy. But the messages can't only come from the US to these other countries. A colleague of mine from Nepal was recently at the climate change COP in Paris, and he was very frustrated that these Americans and all these Westerners are telling the people from the low consumption countries how to take care of the environment. And he said, if you look at resource use, it's the Nepalis who should be going around the world telling people how to live environmentally sustainable lifestyles, because it takes so much fewer resources for these people from the low income or low consumption countries to live their lives. And if you look at it that way, the definition of prosperity, again through GDP, is all about consumption. How much are we consuming? So you're wealthy because you consume a lot. Now, what other ways could we be wealthy? Are there other ways? Of course. So the definition of economics is allocation of scarce resources to satisfy unlimited wants. So first, of course, why are we talking about wants? We have enough food in the world to feed everyone. What if we directed our energy at first satisfying people's needs, the actual needs, not the wants? And then you get into the resource part. So even though economists often deny it, of course our fuels and our metals are limited, and we're using most of them up, and it's a complete disaster. But are all of our resources limited? What is unlimited? Are there other sources of wealth that we can keep using without using them up? Come on, Mr. Bangladesh. You're with me here. Give me an example. You've got a lot of it in your country. I'll give you a hint.
For me, actually, most important thing is, at the end of the day, whether you are happy or not, that's the most important thing. And it doesn't need to consume a lot of things. This is my second semester. In the first semester, in the first class, I asked the question, what is development? Who defined the development? And to me, the most developed country in the world is Bhutan. I've already traveled around 25 countries, and including 7 European and this America. So there are lots of things to consider, actually.
Yes. So a specific example of a resource that is not limited.
Probably solar energy.
Well, solar, except then you have to build all the materials to catch the solar energy and make use of it. Really stretch outside of the box. Air? You're really outside the box. Boy, this is a hard one because we're so trapped in our box.
So close.
You were closer with Bhutan. Happiness, but how are we getting the happiness? That's not exactly a resource. I would say that's a result of
Human
People.
connection.
Exactly. So,
Satisfaction.
Okay, so example I use. I smiled a lot this morning. I'll have to stop for the rest of the day because I've run out of smiles. I have a limited supply that I have to ration over the course of the day. Of course, when I smile at people and they smile back, I'm happier. And then I smile at other people and they smile back and I feel even better. And I smile more and more people smile more. Okay, it sounds like a silly example, But the human connections, I'm having a bit of a crisis. I'm sick. I can't go to work. I've lost my job. I live in a country with no social security system, no safety net, and my neighbors look after me. And then, when I'm better off, I take care of my neighbors. A lot of you understand these systems, right? And how do we reflect that in GDP? When we talk about how wealthy a country is, where do we put the social connections, people taking care of each other, people caring about each other, people knowing their neighbors? In one generation, around the world, it amazes me, maybe parts of Africa less so, but everywhere I look around the world, in one generation, we've had a huge shift from people, kids walking to school and people knowing their neighbors and trust as a normal part of urban life to what we have now in most of the world. It's a huge loss. And where is that reflected in GDP? So earlier when I talked, someone said, well, the things you're talking about are really hard to measure. We tried doing discounted GDP in China. So we took out the environmental damage. And I wrote about that in my book. And I think it was GDP growth was 5% less. If it had been 7%, it would have been 2%. Not 5% less in that sense. 2% goes from say 7% to 2% when you take out the environmental damage. But it was hard to measure, or maybe they didn't like the results. Same thing with measuring household work. It's excluded from measurements of GDP, and the excuse is that it's really hard to measure it, except household work does count when you do it for someone else. So we know what people get paid. We know what a man gets paid to cook in a shop, or to work in a laundry, or to teach somebody else's kids. So why on earth can't we apply it? And in fact we did across 5 countries, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, and Vietnam. In Bangladesh, it was something, I think it was 1.5 times GDP was the value of women's unpaid household work. And I enjoyed this because basically it says GDP really isn't telling you much of anything because it's leaving out so much that's valuable. So that skit, the woman with the baby, the guy says, whose baby is that? She says, it's my neighbor's. He says, well, where's your baby? She says, well, I gave it to my neighbor to take care of. And he says, well, what's the advantage of that? Or she said, we pay each other to take care of each other's babies. And he says, what's the advantage of that? And she said, well, an economist told me it's a great way to raise GDP. Do you want a more crude example? I have a more crude example. Can I be crude? Do I have permission? Okay, so 2 economists are walking down the street, a rural street, and they see a pile of cow dung. And one economist says to the other, I will give you $100 to eat that cow dung. And the economist thinks about it, it's kind of gross, but he says, okay, just one mouthful. So he takes a mouthful. They walk a bit farther. They see another pile of cow dung. So the guy who's just eaten it says to the other guy, I will pay you $100 to eat a mouthful of the cow dung. So the guy eats it. And they walk along, and they're both feeling a bit sick. And they say to each other, how on earth did we benefit from that? And they think about it, and they say, well, GDP just went up by $200. So try to remember the joke and the extrapolation from the joke, which is that GDP is a pile of... So I actually don't want to talk a whole lot. I want to have a discussion. My question is, A, do these things mean? I mean, we're coming from different places here, people at very different backgrounds, not everybody studying economics or development issues, so I think some people this makes a lot of sense and you've heard similar things, others this might be more new. Just questioning whether these things make sense and whether, I challenge you guys, this is the generation that's finally going to put the nail in that development coffin where we actually could start measuring not how much production we have so that possibly we can buy back the things we destroyed to have the production, to make the money, to be better off so that we can have more billionaires, but instead actually measure the things we care about. And we're not going to get there by waiting for our governments, or certainly for the World Bank, to say, oh gosh, we're actually not on a great path. can we make the noise to change the system? Or am I just a lunatic who's been invited for some crazy reason to come talk to you all? I put it out to you. Questions, a challenge, anyone ready to take up the mantle?
You have anything good?
Do I have anything good? My videos? Me?
So when you're saying revaluing things that matter to us, what do you mean? Do you mean putting on an economic price to those things, like a mother, who's caring for her kids? Or how do you propose you revalue those things that matter to us?
That's an excellent question. So that's a very tricky issue of, okay, we don't value household work, so let's put a price tag on everything. Let's put a price tag on rivers and forests and being able to drink clean water, and that's not really going to solve the problem, obviously, because we're still focused on money. And that's part of the problem, is we confuse money and value. Money and wealth, they're not the same thing. Money is a tool to purchase something. Wealth is a much bigger, much more global concept that encompasses things like strong communities. So what we're measuring at the moment around the world, and the system is set by the United Nations. Governments do not have the ability to change how they measure GDP. They have to follow the rules. They may not do a great job measuring it, but the rules are all set. So we're measuring production, and as I say in the video, it's production no matter whether it's harmful, no matter if it is advantageous, no matter who gets it. What if instead we measured the things we valued, and it doesn't have to be a monetary measure, under gross national happiness. So Bhutan pioneered the system where you can have a point system, 1 to 5. How are you doing on environmental measures, on education, on health, on community vitality? Do neighbors know and look after each other? Do people feel safe? Time. Are people working more than 8 hours a day? And part of the beauty of G&H is they don't just take all these measures and then cough up a single number. So on average, there's 30 people in the room, 28 are quite happy and 2 are suicidal, so overall we're doing great. They say, let's focus on those 2 people. If all over the country we have vital communities, but in our capital of Thimphu, people don't know their neighbors or don't feel safe, then we'll focus on Thimphu. Men are not working more than 8 hours a day. I have to look at Africa while I say this. Men are not working more than 8 hours a day, but women sure are. We don't say, well, it's okay, men are fine. We look at the women. So they actually take each measure, and I think there's 36 individual measures they look at, and they look at each one in terms of population groups and locations, and they want those measures to go up, especially where they're lowest. So how do we respond to wherever there's a problem? Somebody's compared it to having in your car, I don't have a car, so I'm not going to get this wrong. You can look at how fast you're going. There's probably a word for that.
Speedometer.
Speedometer, yeah, there's a speedometer, and then there's a meter that tells you how much gas you have. And what if you combine that into one measure? How useful would that be? And that's what we do with GDP per capita. We take one measure, we divide it across the population. We don't know whether things are evenly spread or spread at a huge difference. So G&H tries to get around that, and it's not about money. Income is one of the 36 measures they look at.
We had a discussion this morning about a culture, an organizations that foster a culture of empathy. And now we're looking at productivity, where there is a set of relationships of nurture within a working environment. There are metrics to demonstrate that those environments are more productive than when there's a very different kind of organizational culture. And so I think, and metrics have been established to identify how those nurturing environments, in fact, the increments in productivity and in job satisfaction and in general happiness. I mean, all the things that you're talking about. So I think some of the social science research is actually kind of moving in this direction. And I read recently that if it suggested that any activity that is not it's not a direct quote, it's a paraphrase, but that is not embracing love and empathy is wasted time. You're wasting your time. So these are kind of new concepts for me to kind of ponder and think about. But I think it goes to your point.
I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about my personality. I'm gonna get personal, because these are really personal issues, I think. I think it's easier to understand these things if we do look at it from within ourselves. And I thought, okay, I love being around people. I have really strong personal connections. I have a saying I try to use in Bangladesh, or anywhere I go, which is everybody I see, they can be. Every child is everybody's child. We should all care about these kids. So if I see a street kid, it could be my child. And my definition of success is that everybody around me does well. In a classroom, I would like to see not do I get an A, but does everybody in my class pass? Once I've learned the things, let me turn around and help my peers. And I think about these things a lot, and just recently it occurred to me that my thoughts about economics enable my loving personality, because I am not trying to cut people out and succeed and climb over them and do better than them. And I thought, my goodness, that's actually an interesting finding, that it's much easier to be loving and caring about everybody in a bigger circle, not my own little piece of my community. I said I try to be a global citizen. I've been to 50 countries. I have friends all over the world. And I don't see it as a competition. That when I read about that in economics, it always drives me crazy. So I will compete and succeed, which means someone else is going to fail, and then they have to figure out a way to beat everybody else. And how on earth are we ever going to move forward when we think that way? And if we had more cooperative thinking, which is more about small local businesses and not trying to undercut people, and I don't need my business to be huge. That's not my goal. My goal is to provide a simple service to my community and to make enough that I can live a decent lifestyle. And it's enabled by the fact that my government provides me with free, high-quality education and healthcare, and a few other benefits. And we're not working against each other, we're working with each other. And how much nicer would life be if those were our goals? Is that hopelessly idealistic?
Let's open it up. Let's have a discussion. And
I think it is idealistic, and I agree with you. And I like the idealism, and I want to say thank you for coming out and talking about your book, because I studied economics in undergrad, and I also agree with you completely, and so I have both ways of thinking in my head at the same time, which is makes for difficult homework assignments sometimes. And I guess I have two questions I'd like to ask you. One is, what kind of advice would you give to the people in this room who are going into a professional track, on the vast majority, I would assume, are going to a professional track here in DC that is dominated by large organizations that do have this competitive bent, this ideological bent. How can people operate in that kind of professional atmosphere? And then part two is how, and this is what I'm personally interested in, is how do you apply this progressive point of view about development to U.S. society? How can, rather than people looking abroad to develop other countries, how can people look at U.S. society to develop U.S. society, which I think it's a long-term path, but it's a long-term solution, but that ultimately is the way that it kind of has this ripple effect back to these larger institutions. Those are my two questions.
Yeah, oh, easy, no problem. Solve those immediately. Sorry, sarcasm again. I worry, I only recently I've started working a lot with university students, and I love working with university students. I love the energy and the creativity and the optimism. I worry a bit. I try to inculcate my ideas, and they love them, and then they're going to go back to the so-called real world and lose all that idealism. But then I thought about it. I thought, well, who's going to change the institutions? And maybe there's ways to influence on different levels, and that would be the best. But at least if there's people going out there who have a better vision of what they're trying to achieve and who gradually can talk back about these things. So when people say, oh, we have to outcompete, we have to grow, and we have to be stronger, and you can stop and say, why? Now, if you are a corporation, you may not have much choice by the laws of stakeholder enrichment or violent takeovers, Wall Street. Well, you're hostile takeovers if you don't make enough money. So that's, hopefully you're not going to go work for corporations. That makes it a little harder. Some young people are going to be in government, they're going to run organizations, they're going to have leadership roles, and if you do have these values and hold on to them, you can work to inculcate them. There's shortcuts. I mean, one thing is using media, obviously. How do we have a greater presence on media? Just as I'm talking about this, so this card, We Squared, we just started this, so if you please visit our website. Please, we're also on Facebook. You're not going to see much because we just started it, literally a couple weeks ago. But you can be the early, not the early initiators, the early people in this process. We want to get people from around the world discussing these issues, and there's a lot of scope to make connections and figure out ways that we can challenge some of these things, promote the idea of better well-being as opposed to just more consumption. As to how do we reform things in the U.S., there's incredible arrogance in the U.S. in terms of us thinking we're going to teach the world all these things. And I like sometimes when I give my talks in Asia to say, is there poverty in the U.S.? And I get a mixed reaction. Some people say yes, and other people, oh, poverty, U.S.? Streets paved with gold. Still to this day, and most of them have relatives living in the U.S., and they don't know what things are like here. A young woman came to talk to my Asian University for Women students about various things, including Black Lives Matter, and they did not really know about racism in the United States. I think that's a problem that has to be solved within the U.S., and it's people who are living here who have a better idea. But I think my main thing is two things. When older people say, you can't do that, it's impossible, what I say to them is, please share your expertise and your experience, and when you get to the point of saying that's impossible, just shut up. So you can probably say that more politely and diplomatically than I do. The last person I said that to laughed, so that was good. We have a lot to learn from older people, but when they tell us, oh, you're so idealistic, oh, you think you can change things, I tried it and I didn't succeed. I heard that when I went into Peace Corps, and being an arrogant American, my response was, well, obviously you did it wrong. Now, I didn't succeed at what I tried in Peace Corps, but that arrogance is still in my head, because we've had a lot of advocacy successes. In my book, part 2 is about how to make these changes, and we've succeeded at a lot of things, and I know that advocacy can succeed if we go about it right. And there are a lot of global movements. There's a lot of anger against World Trade Organization, against these crazy measurements, against this growing wealth and power of the very rich. So I think it's easier in that sense. It's much easier in the sense of connections. I grew up in the day, I remember I was in Guatemala when the fax machine was invented, and I couldn't figure out what the heck they were talking about. I was in a village in Guatemala, and they're talking about this thing that sends things over images over the phone line. Look where we are now. So you've got some great advantages, and maybe it's partly an international dialogue where people from America can help other people understand better what's going on here, questioning what we're valuing in the United States. How are we ever going to get to somewhere better?
Debra, I would like to just, before people begin to filter away, I'd like to introduce Ian Guest, who is the founder and director of a program called Advocacy Project. And just say, because there's some folks here, I think, who would like, if you will permit,
Of course.
Ian, just say a word about that. And there's some folks here might be interested in it because it involves university students.
Well, Joe's put me on the spot here.
Yes, I have.
And I do apologise for.
So stand up.
I do apologise for. I feel as if I'm in class, you know, being interrogated. Apologise for coming late to your talk. But our project works with community-based organisations. We have two partners in Bangladesh. One is called Burdo, which works with the blind, and the other is called the Sabornagam Foundation, which works with the river gypsies and the river Meghnas. So I don't know if either of those are familiar to you, but I'd certainly be interested in talking. And we recruit graduate students to go out and volunteer with our partner organisations. And we've taken a lot of people from AU through the years, thanks to Joe's efforts on our behalf and others. And I'm amazed at the commitment and the skills that young professionals have and their willingness to engage. I mean, I think it's quite difficult to find the right formula, because they're only available for a short period of time. We don't want them wasting their energy and wasting their time, but I think we've come up with a pretty good formula. So I'd be very happy to talk to you more about it, and if anyone wants to get in touch with me, they can always find me through Joe.
I'm looking at some graduate students who are about to, move into the future, and you might want to have a conversation with Ian. Thanks.
Sure, I'm happy to leave my car, but I didn't want to interrupt. It was
No
very
problem.
unfair of Joe to sort of,
You have questions over here?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it because, I also think in that line, and I question myself whether I'm an idealist because there are a lot of people who are living under poverty. I was one of them. I didn't have access to 2 meals per day, and it was really hard to think like this. I'm here on a scholarship, and I question myself because I'm an idealist because I have access to many things. The way somebody questioned you. I think my question to you is also the same, that because we have a lot of access to everything, and we can think like this, but then people who are living in extreme poverty cannot think like this. So probably some sort of facilitation is needed, but then, yeah.
Well, if you look at the people, I talk about this repeatedly in the book, if you look at the people who say, you can't do that, it'll cost jobs. So every time we try to do something for the environment, for instance, they say job loss. But then you look at those people, and are they actually promoting good quality jobs, or are they cutting their workforce to save money? And most of the time, so when the rich say, oh, you can't tax us at a higher rate because that will hurt economic productivity, which will cause even more poverty. Self-interest is a great indicator to people's actual motives. And they're not going to say, I like having millions of dollars, please don't tax me. They say, oh no, taxing me would hurt economic productivity. And I'm fascinated that to encourage the rich to be more economically active, we have to give them the reward of millions of dollars. And to encourage the poor to be economically productive, we have to threaten them with starvation. Why don't we have the same motivation across the board? So when you start to analyze the messages and the people making it, it becomes pretty clear that it's all a bunch of, the countdown? No, I'm sorry, eyewash. We have to learn, I think one of the main things we have to do is learn how to analyze media and the things people say. Media, especially in the United States, is owned by a few very, very wealthy people, and it is a tool of mind control. And okay, I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's pretty obvious. If you read some of Noam Chomsky's books or other people, you can learn to decipher these messages, and simply who is called a terrorist, who is a freedom fighter, all sorts of things that the media is indoctrinating us. And if we, the love of shopping, I actually found this fascinating. I thought about it, and was it Princess Diaries and what's the Sex in the City? There's all these movies telling us that shopping is really fun. And I thought, my God, if shopping were so much fun, why are they spending so much money telling us how fun shopping is? Because a lot of people find shopping actually stressful and unpleasant, especially when they get their credit card bill at the end of the month. So the idea that shopping creates happiness, well gosh, who's putting that message out? So there's all sorts of messages up and down the political spectrum. And I personally have a great fun when I see those messages, I talk back, sometimes out loud. And it really helps. So when Shell says we care about the environment, I say, no, you want to convince us you're not destroying the environment. When Playboy gives money to women's, say, rape centers, I say, well, gosh, if we didn't have Playboy magazine, maybe fewer women would need the rape centers. There's ways to learn to talk back and to understand the way our thoughts really are affected by the media, our understanding of global issues, as well as what's going on in the US. So one of the first steps is to liberate our minds, and then we realize all these so-called radical ideas, this idealism. What's idealism mean? And to me, it's looking at the existing systems and saying, this is insane. This is completely crazy. We have sovereign governments who can't act on behalf of people and the environment, even if they want to, because of global trade treaties. We have cities where it's dangerous to breathe the air. You can't cross the street without risk of being killed. Someone was asking me earlier, are you worried about terrorism in Bangladesh? And I said, no, I'm much more likely to get killed crossing the street than by a terrorist attack. And if you say, okay, it's the existing world that is insane, it's all of you who accept this, who are ridiculously impractical, and I, having solutions and trying to work towards solutions, I'm the practical one. Now, it sounds funny, but if you think about it, it's actually true. And so when people fight you or put you down for being an idealist, they'd much rather be an idealist than somebody who accepts all this horrible stuff. Lots of questions, yay. I'll be shorter in my answers.
Thank you again for coming and sharing with us. As you're talking, I'm thinking back on Marianela and I were recently on a delegation in Guatemala, actually meeting with a lot of mining impacted communities. And so I'm just wondering, they're facing a lot of threats, intimidation, and actual loss of life at the hands of like state and private companies. How can we work with those situations, where people's human rights are being violated at such a blatant level? And I mean, communities there were so organized and so great at telling us, this is what we want. We want another version of development. We're not opposed to development. We just have different ideas of what that looks like. How can we work on that together in those kinds of contexts?
Yeah, there's no short answer to that. The only short answer I'll give you is the more people you can bring together, it's harder to pick out a group than to take out an individual. And if you could find high-level people to come on your side, it makes it safer.
Yes, Debra, you have raised many questions, and as an African, as we're speaking, just not only I can see myself in what my friend here was saying, but I grew up in public places begging for money, trying to go to cook and to eat, because my father was a primary school Baptist teacher, and I couldn't just meet our needs. In fact, he was even unable to send us to school where he taught himself. You spoke about how sovereign are multinational companies over our governments. Let me bring that discourse to Africa, really, because where things are falling apart and the center cannot hold, if one can just quote that wonderful statement of Shula Chebe. In fact, as we were talking, I was just even to some extent paraphrasing somebody like Bob Marley, just speaking of values that we have lost. Didn't Bob Marley sang of good friends we had, but good friends are lost? Just and again, just one sometimes very confused. In fact, I heard my friend there speaking about development. Just I wrote a memo just because just Joe did ask me to say something. And in fact, I was asking myself, what is development anyhow? What is it? Just what is it, development? And today we hear that there is such a thing as the UN 2030, just agenda for sustainable development, and which is very ambitious, and it claims, let me quote, to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty and want to heal and secure a planet. And then end quote. And my question is that is not only this UN 2030 agenda for sustainable development just a mirage, a utopia, what it goes, just do they have power really? Because those who are having power of our governments, just people are here. In fact, who is teaching who, as you just what you mentioned. Again, John and I always speak about that wonderful book of Paulo Freire, just the pedagogy
Freire,
of your
you know
press.
Paulo Freire is.
Just we,
Hey,
I
you
don't
read that in
know.
development?
So
You
thank
know,
you
read
very
that
much.
studying development?
Really just
Pedagogy of the approach.
that's the confusion, that's the trouble, that's we as people coming from those so-called developing countries, we find ourselves in that crossroad of much confusion. Sometimes we don't know where to go because who can to teach us what?
Yeah. Do you mind if I just butt in here real quick? Thank you for that reflection. But I was just reflecting about the question about Guatemala. I got a big poster in my office from Desmond Tutu that says, "Messages from the desk of God are told through the stories of our fellow human beings. We but need to listen." So when people are going off to the developing world to be present and hopefully make an edifying contribution in some way or another, I think the most important gift that you can give your brothers and sisters in the developing world is the gift of your attention. Give them your attention. And then let them tell their story. That's the most, and that is a sacred, holy interaction. And then you can take that story and you can retell that story to your own brothers and sisters. And I think that's a helpful corrective because we do want to make it. We want to do good in the world. Well, how do you do good in the world? It's a very complicated thing. But I think that your experience in Guatemala and the fact that you went to Guatemala, I think the most important thing we can do is just listen.
DRC, am I correct? You have extreme,
Where things are falling
incredible
apart.
mineral resources, right? How did you become a poor country? Look at your mineral resources. So, I mean, okay, this sounds a bit radical again, but as far as I understand, if you are a corporation and want to get resources very cheaply, a great strategy is to destabilize the country, and then you don't have to pay anything resembling market rates. So the destabilization in Africa, a friend of mine from Vietnam was recently talking to a guy from Cameroon, and he said, "You guys fought a war for independence from the French, right?" She said, "Yes, and we're kind of annoyed because you guys got your independence without having to fight a war." And he started laughing and said, "Independence? What are you talking about?" So as long as these different countries have their grip on these resources, and it seems like the countries with certainly oil are the ones with the greatest conflict. I mean, countries like Nigeria. So that whole idea of poverty, well, if these resources underground are so valuable, how is it that these countries are so poor? Niger, the fanciest building I saw in Niamey, the capital of Niger, was the Ministry of Mines. I don't know what they have, but obviously this was, and it's pretty much guaranteed that whatever money they're getting from selling what they're taking out of those mines is not staying in Niger.
We have our grip on the resources from the Congo right here. I've got my grip on resources from the Congo.
You're welcome.
And so forth.
Yes.
Listen,
I mean, it's easy, it's
should
fun to buy.
we should probably have another question, and then we should wrap this up.
So I have a short question. Before that, I just want to make a comment. I'm very optimistic. It's been almost 8 months. I've been in USA, and when I interacted with the young people, I feel good, and it encourages me because to me, the mindset of the young people in USA is much broadened and progressive, and that's an inspiration. And my question is, actually, I have been looking for alternatives of development. It's not like that there is nothing else. I don't believe that. So my question, do you suggest, as according to your lecture talk, well-being is an alternative of it?
Right, I've stopped using the word development and developing because it's obviously nonsensical. And yes, if we know what we're aiming at, let's aim to achieve those goals as opposed to what development tends to mean is simply trying to generate more and more money, more and more consumption, destroy our environment without ever reaching the goals we care about. Just quickly, better.
So referring to that, it seems like an alternative, at least to this neoliberalism, is greater democracy. But I'm wondering, what do you think of this kind of view now that China is the model and that you don't need democracy to have a lot of growth? This like.
Yeah, short answer, read my book, but China, they've completely destroyed their environment, and the situation of the workers is, in many cases, atrocious, and we can certainly do better than that. So, no, people don't want to be starving, and yes, China's growth has lifted a lot of people out of that desperate poverty, but they could have done it in a much better way. So if you say simply, when people say, well, it worked, people are out of poverty, the question is, could we have done it better? And of course we could, if that were our goal. If our goal weren't to make some of the Chinese extremely wealthy while allowing some of the very, very desperate Chinese to at least get to a level where they can eat 3 meals a day, but can no longer breathe the air or drink the water. So I'm sure we can do better, and I'm happy to see the enthusiasm and optimism in this audience, because it's, as I said, it's up to you guys to figure out how we're going to make these changes, but I share the belief that it's absolutely possible, and it has to be, because we can't obviously continue the way we are.
Great. Well, I think we thank you very much.